Welcome, a very warm welcome to the Plurilingual Lab speaker sessions. Ismisha Palmigan Chiblo, Shigela Hanamagus, Hamia Glasgow Alaba, Isma Urgon Anju. So my name is Paul Megan Chiblo, McGill from Glasgow, Scotland, and it's very nice to be talking to you all today virtually. I hope you're all well. I am the host of the Plurilingual Lab speaker sessions. Before I introduce our wonderful panel speaker today, I would like to begin with a land acknowledgement. I'm speaking to you today from the land of Toronto, Canada, and I would like to acknowledge this land, the plants, water, animals and spirits, and the responsibilities we have to them. For thousands of years, Toronto has been a traditional land and territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and today is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. I'm very grateful to have this opportunity to work, live in this land, and to be talking with you all today virtually. So, miigwech agus tapaleif. Now, without further ado, it is my great honor to introduce you all to our wonderful panel speaker, Dr. Amir Kalan. We are so excited for this book launch today and the talk on sociocultural and power-relational aspects of multilingual writing. So we're very honored and very excited to have you here today. So before I pass the talk over to Dr. Kalan, just some reminders, please. During the talk, if you could please keep your video and sound off. You can, of course, use the thumbs up and the clapping hands feature during the talk. And please, if you have any questions, feel free to do that, to write them in the chat as we go, and they will be answered in the Q&A sessions after the 1 hour long talk. The talk today will be recorded and available on the Plurilingual Lab YouTube channel. So after the talk, this talk will last around about 1 hour. We will have 30 minutes for a Q&A discussion. You can unmute your microphone as well at that point to ask a question, or you can place your question in the chat. The discussion will be moderated by Ben Kalman and Lee Peng and will not be recorded. So, and just also to remind you as well that after the talk, I'll be sharing with you a flyer so that you can get access to the book that Dr. Kalan is sharing with us today as well. So without further ado, I pass it to you, Dr. Kalan, and thank you so much again for joining us today.
Thank you very much for your introduction. So I guess I start by sharing my slides. So I should start with thanking Plurilingual Lab, BILD and DISE Talks for organizing this event. I particularly want to thank Dr. Angelica Galanta for not only organizing this event, but creating an intellectual hub that has brought together a lot of scholars who are interested in second language education. Thank you very much for making this happen. I have been watching your presentations, and I've learned a great deal of the speakers that you have invited, and I'm happy to be one of them in this forum, just speaking about my latest book. I would like to start the presentation with sharing a little bit about my research interest. To talk about how the book actually has come out of that interest, then broadly talk about some of the themes that I highlight in the book. So I'm generally interested in minoritized populations' literacy practices. There are different purposes when it comes to approaching minoritized populations to study how they engage with the language and literacy. Some people are interested in empowering these populations. Some people are interested in providing voice for these populations. I think these are valid purposes, but that's not necessarily the direction I take in my research with minoritized populations. I actually approach minoritized populations because I believe that they have very rich literacy, forms of literacy engagement that we can learn from. So rather than going towards them to empower them, I believe that the legacies and the literacy backgrounds in different ways can empower how we deal with education and can empower educational structures. So I'm interested in minoritized populations' literacies because I see their engagement with literacy as organic literacy practices that can somehow be models for resistance and nurturing education as opposed to our current and dominant industrial colonial neoliberal education. In the book that this book launch is about today, I emphasize, actually I focus on the industrial aspects of writing education, but I do make references to the colonial nature and neoliberal nature of our education in general, and particularly writing education as well, because I believe that the kind of the industrial nature of our writing education helps the colonial agenda in this education regime and education system. And at the same time, it really helps the neoliberal education industry. So the industrial nature of our current educational structures help colonial agendas because they have been really instrumental in creating possibilities for homogenizing different populations and for actually creating different forms of othering. So when you have a certain model that everybody has to follow, I think that model could become a very important tool in the hands of colonial educators. At the same time, I think the industrial nature of education leads to very important organizational strategies for our dominant neoliberal educational structures. So neoliberal education is very much interested in treating education as product and treating learners as customers. So the industrial nature of neoliberal education really helps it treat lessons and syllabi and curricula as these kind of products that could be mass produced and mass consumed by different consumers. So although in the book I focus on the industrial kind of dimension of writing education and writing studies, I do feel that the industrial kind of element or the industrial feature actually is connected directly to the colonial and neoliberal dimensions of education. At the same time, my engagement with minoritized populations is not really just out of academic curiosity, or it's not a form of academic experimentation. I'm interested in these populations because I have been part of these populations, particularly as an immigrant in North America. So since I came to North America, I have been living with these populations. I've shared the concerns and their anxieties, and because I've been privileged to be an educational researcher and to have the chance to observe North American educational structures, I've always been puzzled at how little we try to learn from very sophisticated literacy practices that immigrants and refugees bring with them into countries like United States and Canada. So I know I use the expression, I approach these populations, but probably I have to correct myself. I really don't approach them. I've been living with these populations, and I've been amazed at their experiences. And I just feel it's not fair that their experiences are not only actually taken advantage of and used in our educational system. So I believe it's not really fair because that we ignore their experiences and sometimes regard these populations as less knowledgeable and less able in our dominant educational structures. So in my research, I really look at minoritized populations as and oppressed populations as organic intellectuals who are enjoying sophisticated forms of literacy and engagement. So in a way, I draw on notions like the conceptualization of Campano and Iso, that we should regard immigrant students as cosmopolitan intellectuals. The literacy practices and knowledge are not merely relevant for the respective communities, but also have value for the world we share. So it's very important to highlight that I am interested in minoritized populations' literacy engagements as really a solution to different problems we have. And let's not forget that our North American academia or English-speaking academia typically comes up with new concepts like multiliteracies, translanguaging, experiential learning, and we package them as state-of-the-art research and as kind of innovative approaches in education. Let's not forget that a lot of minoritized populations have sometimes for millennia, if not, have been using the same strategies and have been engaging with these concepts, perhaps without framing them in a kind of education industry which is interested to sell products as the owner of knowledge and the leader in higher education research. So if you go to any village in a place like India or Pakistan or Afghanistan, you see that people have been doing translanguaging forever. If you go to a place like Azerbaijan, you see multiliteracy is part and parcel of their education. If you go to any city probably in Africa, you're going to see that they have been engaging with experiential learning for a long time. So my research and my book, actually, this particular book, comes out of this mentality that perhaps we should just take a second and breathe a little bit, try not to be innovative in academia, and listen to immigrants themselves and see how they engage with literacy and how they formulate effective literacy engagement. So the project that this book is about is actually a participatory ethnographic research project, which focuses on practicing multilingual writers' literate lives and writing practices. So in this project, I just invited the people who were sharing my experience as an immigrant in Toronto, Canada, to come together and to think about our literate backgrounds and to think about how we navigate very complicated industrial educational structures in Canada, and to see what are the main challenges we have. I'm using the word practicing for this group of multilingual writers because I have tried to avoid using kind of value-loaded terminology like successful or effective or even professional and student. I look at these group of writers as thousands of immigrants in Canada who know English and who are writing on an everyday basis, and are embraced by different professional and academic and literary communities. So practicing allows me to just broaden the identity of this group, who are actually adult English writers, multilingual English writers. But at the same time, I hope practicing indicates the fact that I did my research, which this book is about, outside formal educational structures. So it is very typical in second language writing research that you conduct some sort of project on the students that you're teaching in the classrooms, either at school or at university. But my research project was a little bit different. I wanted to live with these people in the homes. I wanted to see the workplaces. So practicing multilingual writers just gives me that opportunity to broaden the identity of these writers, to include really a larger population of immigrants in Canada. So the questions I had for this project were kind of briefly, I wanted to know what organic writing practices practicing multilingual writers engage with. But I wanted to know about the organic writing practices outside educational settings, because official educational settings, because they would help me to understand what sociocultural, discursive, and power-relational contexts these participants actually engage with, and how those contexts help them with the writing and impact the writing practices. So the kind of the main challenge that I think I face as we try to understand what are the organic writing practices that multilingual writers engage with, I think we decided that the more we try to define organic practices, we are really defining it against an educational structure which is really highly industrialized. So my definition of industrialization of education and educational structures is based on a definition of the type that you see here. So in industrialization, in kind of different forms of industrialized labor, you're looking at a number of different elements. You're looking at the technical and social division of labor. You want to make a standardized goods, and you have a Fordian conveyor belt or other forms of assembly and organization to create a standardized goods in a large number. So you look at mass production as well. So when I talk about an industrialized writing education, the way I see most of our writing education in North America is really a kind of Fordian conveyor belt. Students are imagined as a product on this belt, and different skills are supposed to be added to students at different points on the belt. So what does it mean in practice for our writing education? What are those different parts that we are supposed to add to our students in our industrialized writing education? In order to identify those parts, we have to recognize that in this kind of industrialized writing education, we have a very aggressive compartmentalization of writing topics and writing skills. I think the major thing in most institutions in North America, I think that's more the case with the United States. We have a separation of service courses and content courses. So we teach introductory writing courses to students when they come to university, and we separate those service courses, like the introductory writing courses, from actual content courses like history, philosophy, science, economics. So in a way, we make the service courses practices really contextless. I know that in different institutions, there are brilliant educators who try to add those contexts to what they do, but they do that despite the will of the structure, and I think the way the structure has been designed. And it's usually very challenging to create that context. So the biggest kind of division is service courses and content courses. We have, there is a lot of research about leveled writing, and people have been criticizing leveled writing, but there is less conversation about leveled, there is a lot of research about leveled reading, and people have been criticizing leveled reading in different publications. But there is really less of that conversation about leveled writing, but while we know that we have leveled writing really aggressively. So we have introductory, advanced, and we stream our students to applied and academic divisions that require different forms of writing practices for the students because of the perceptions of their abilities and the needs. Academic genres have always been genres have been separated from creative writing, but at the same time they have been divided into different forms of writing as well. So you take a course to do academic writing, but there is proposal writing, grant writing workshops, there is technical writing, creative writing is a different category, and of course there is test preparation writing education. For those of you who are familiar with second language education, you know that that's huge. So if you imagine test preparation courses for tests like IELTS and TOEFL, it's a huge industry, and those writing classes have their own existence and their own paradigms. So again, it's really interesting to see how many divisions we have when it comes to teaching academic writing. In second language education, particularly, which actually the book is about, we have separated different language skills. So you go to any language school in Toronto, for instance, you see that these different skills are taught separately. So you go to one class, you do speaking, you go to another class, you do reading, then writing is in a different class, you do your grammar and vocabulary and listening to other classes. So again, there is kind of heavy compartmentalization of the skills in second language education. We treat the same. We treat our kind of out-of-class support, student support, with the same mentality. I know that there are great individuals in writing centers and student support centers trying to help students, but the way the system has been structured seemingly has been based on a kind of industrial mentality that writing center is there, and I've been in conversation with a lot of writing center consultants, and that's usually the complaint as well. So writing centers are viewed as this kind of this garage with mechanics who can fix the problem if something goes wrong with the actual writing classes or with the actual kind of main hardcore courses that the students are engaging with. So again, I think it seems to be a little bit of a kind of industrial mentality. You do quality checking. If something is wrong, you send the students to the writing center to be fixed. So in this industrial division of labor and division of kind of responsibilities when it comes to teaching and learning writing, there are different hierarchies as well. So in our writing education, the dominant genre is essays, literacy, and report writing. There is a language hierarchy. Monolingualism is usually the norm, and particularly European languages. I think I could have added another slide just highlighting that most of the time when we speak about bilingualism and translanguaging, although there are brilliant scholars who deeply care about the experiences of minoritized students and definitely mobilize these concepts to invite these students to be part of the mainstream education. But typically when we talk about bilingualism, and when you look at the conceptual etymology of these terms, bilingualism usually, for instance, in the context of Canada, means French and English. Or when we're talking about translanguaging in the US, I think most of the time, I think people are really discussing Spanish and English. So I think those could be included in this slide as well, that European or colonial languages are usually at the top of our conversations when it comes to writing education. And of course, there is a semiotic hierarchy. So orality is at the bottom of this hierarchy, and essays, literacy typically in English, is at the top. So again, there are other divisions at the same time. You have the Fordian conveyor belt, but there are other layers that really add to compartmentalization of this very complex system. I believe that by over-regulating the process of teaching and learning writing, we have cut off essential organic dimensions of the act of writing, such as the emotive, hermeneutic, ideological, and sociocultural contexts in which writers and readers interact. So going back to my description of my research interest and connecting that with the book, so I'm interested in minoritized populations' experiences with literacy because I find them as very, very organic practices that can help us see what we are missing in our mainstream literacy education. So I believe that with cutting off these organic layers of writing, what we do in our writing education is practically disturbing the writing trajectory of the students, because as our students' writing trajectory, particularly if they're multilingual students, they have complex trajectories, and most of the legacies are not really used in writing classes. So in many ways, I think we just disturb that trajectory, and we interfere with our students' active identity negotiation as writers. So most often we don't treat our writing students as individuals with very strong writing identities. I think most of the time, because of the industrial structures we have, our educators are limited to one course or one lesson or one workshop. And they have their own lessons that they have to teach. So in a way, we treat the students as if they have nothing called a writing identity. My experience as a writing teacher has always been, if we don't treat the students as individuals with a strong writing identity, not only we ignore their rich experiences, but we cannot be really useful when it comes to helping them get new skills or new knowledge from our classes, but in a very organic way, connect those experiences with the writing legacy and writing identity. So with this introduction, now I just start talking about some major themes that you will be able to read in the book that we have organized this event about. So a main theoretical framework that I've created in this book is a framework that I've called the writing world. So I have created this concept based on Dante's The Art World. So Dante is famous for his institutional theory of art. So basically what Dante did was, after centuries, if not millennia of conversations about what art is, and while everybody was looking at artistic products as where we have to find this answer, by looking at the artistic products to see what is in the artistic product, which makes it artistic, and which has people appreciate that work of art. Dante suggested that the product is important, but not as important as we think. Actually, the art world is an institution. So regardless of what the artwork is, that institution decides if we should appreciate that product. I think this is important. So this is how the Dante's institutional theory of art has been defined. X is an artwork, in a sense, if and only if X is an artifact. So if you're talking about what is art, what is artistic, the only kind of feature you need is just being an artifact. So as you can see, there is no kind of aesthetic considerations attached to this. So any artifact in the world could be an artwork. The second condition is someone acting on behalf of a certain institution or the art world confers the status of being a candidate for appreciation. So X is an artwork, and it could be any artifact, but you need an institution to offer this artwork as an artifact that we can appreciate as an artwork. I know it's a little bit complicated, but I hope my translation into my own theory of the writing world can simplify the story. So let's bring that concept in my conceptualization of the writing world. So we use great writing or good writing, I think rather carelessly in everyday teaching when it comes to teaching and learning writing. But great writing, based on my conceptualization of the writing world, has to meet three conditions. First, great writing could be about any text. So any text is a good text, any text is good writing. But as long as the writing world offers the text for appreciation or publication. And the writing world always functions within a certain epistemic, cultural, political, and ideological context. So what I'm trying to establish here is, next to our perceptions of good writing or our formulations of good writing, it is very important in the process of teaching and learning writing to pay attention to the writing world, including publishers, teachers, policymakers, and how they assume great writing is, and their connections and the functions. And at the same time, pay attention to the perspectives, the biases, the ideologies they bring with them into those conversations where they decide about great writing. So this book is really about the dynamics of the writing world in the Anglo-American world, in the education industry, in the English-speaking world. So what are some of the dynamics and what are some of the characteristics of the activities of the writing world, of the Anglo-American writing world? This is what my participants and I probably would consider as important themes that teachers and policymakers need to pay attention to. So these are some of those themes. Anglo-American writing education is particularly obsessed with formalist pedagogies because of the industrial nature that it has created. So writing teachers typically see themselves as gatekeepers of that rhetorical world, so they do their best to prepare students for abstract models that are usually very vague, but I think they're treated as if they're clear in the classroom, employing different formalist pedagogies. So I think the main concern of the Anglo-American writing education is really how you form a text, what are the rules you have to follow, and the perceptions of how these, how your ability to follow these rules and these formalistic elements could be judged by a potential reader that usually doesn't read your paper, because the only audience of a lot of our writing our students do is really the teacher. So the first theme is formalist pedagogies and the obsession of Anglo-American writing education with formalist pedagogies. Another important theme that we discuss in the book is industrial assessment. So it is very, I think, it is understandable that when you have an industrial writing education, you have to think about how you can assess a lot of textual products in a short time, and how you can just mold them and frame them to look the same. So in the book, I write a lot against actually rubrics as as a form of industrial writing writing assessment tool. So that's a really big theme. I think that theme has other manifestations next to rubrics, like think about, for instance, the process pedagogy, where peer feedback is employed as, again, a kind of industrial step to reduce the work of the teachers when it comes to the final feedback. So peer feedback is an amazing practice. I use that all the time in my writing classes, but I think often, particularly through a process pedagogy approach, it could be used just as one step to fix some of the issues before the final assignments get to me as a teacher. Another thing we discuss in the book is rhetorical policing. So when you have a homogenizing writing education, and when everybody is supposed actually to write in the same genre and in the same language, I think one dangerous consequence of that is rhetorical policing. Because we're focusing on second language writing here, I think you can imagine that how complex that practice could become in our second language writing classes. There are major fields actually which focus on rhetorical differences in second language writing. Contrastive rhetoric is really notorious because of regarding a non-Western and I think in particular non-Anglo-American rhetoric as inferior and as lacking. But I think the kind of more evolved version of contrastive rhetoric, like intercultural rhetoric, in different ways really have been busy policing and profiling rhetoric rather than trying to create a form of bridge between different genres or creating rhetorical third spaces. So intercultural rhetoric has been really, really busy just to identify what are the different rhetorical practices of non-Anglo-American cultures. So one major theme in the book is really rhetorical policing and profiling, and how while we talk about intercultural connections and intercultural rhetoric, we practically, I think, are involved in identifying what the other does rather than to create fusions, rhetorical and genre fusions. So another major theme is discussing genre as a theory of nuanced difference rather than genre essentialism. So in the book, I explain how genre theories in second language writing are basically built on European traditions which go back to structuralism and before that to Russian formalism. I'm always puzzled when I look at the kind of major genre theorists in second language education when they talk about genre pedagogies, because the genre pedagogies seem to be really focusing on a sort of genre essentialism, as if we have clear templates for genres. Whereas all these conversations in Anglo-American academia are based on the conversations of people like Shklovsky in Russian formalism and Bakhtin, and when they talk about genre, they're very much aware of genre differences. So their theories of genre are based on the differences between textual products rather than what makes them similar. That's the same case with the structuralism, as the grandfather of a lot of these kind of genre conversations in second language education. Again, as we know, structuralism still, although they were looking for ultimate structures, still they did that based on the difference in semiotic structures. So in the book, I write a lot about moving beyond genre essentialism and trying to see genre as a kind of as a form of theory of nuanced difference. I think it is very important because I think if we see genre as a living thing which can change freely, I think we wouldn't be really less concerned about the genre practices of multilingual writers in our writing classes. I think there is a lot of complaint about how multilingual writers and international students, particularly, for instance, at university, find it difficult to follow the norms of Anglo-American writing. I think, to me, that's a symptom of a genre essentialism approach. I think if we see genre as as variation, I think we would have an easier time just accepting genre differences in our classes. We briefly talk about written applications as well. So let's not forget that proposal writing, job application writing, these are very, very important forms for immigrants and people who come to North America. So we couldn't really have conversation about writing without really focusing on application writing. In our conversations, we talk about, and we draw on a lot of literature about this as well, that writing applications really is typically, I think, when it comes to minoritized populations, those written applications are treated as quiet means of racial screening. So there is a lot of research about what your name might sound like on an application form, and how employers and admission committees might treat that name. So I think that was a major kind of theme in our conversations as well. Not only a racial screening in the form I explained, even in a kind of rhetorical, writing applications as a rhetorical obstacle, because job applications might be really different in different cultures. So in a lot of conversations about how my participants actually engage with writing in the classes, in the universities, in the conversations with the professors and with the teachers, in a lot of those conversations, I think we really focused on how writing was used as a form of assimilation. I think it's quite clear for immigrants, but that's the same case with graduate students. So we have a lot of international students, and I think our industrial writing education and the kind of the thesis industry and the dissertation industry in different ways force educators to mold the writing practices of the graduate students, international graduate students. In a sense, I think what we do kind of feels innocent because we are trying to help those students succeed and graduate. But at the same time, I think we should pay attention to the way we are really just molding their academic identities. That has serious consequences. I think those consequences are clearer if you think about international scholars who are sending articles from outside to English journals. So these genres that have been developed in the Anglo-American world and Anglo-American academia, these genres actually are connected to Anglo-American epistemologies. So I think just forcing genres, particularly Anglo-American genres, on international scholars and international graduate students, I think means that we are eroding the cultural epistemologies, and in a way we force them to write for our theories and our epistemologies and our perceptions of knowledge. And at least my participants in this project were not happy with that at all, and they actually mobilized different forms of resistance. Obviously, we had to have a conversation about the standardized test and text within industries. I made a brief reference to TOEFL and IELTS. So there are multiple standardized tests that you got to take as an immigrant if you want to enter a university. And that's a huge industry. That's a multi-billion industry. And I personally feel that a lot of educators in the English-speaking world may not know about the huge dimensions of this industry. So this industry, of course, includes textbooks that the students have to read. It includes a lot of language schools. So that is important because there is a lot of money in those industries. And unfortunately, these industries actually determine a lot of our writing practices. Millions of students and millions of potential immigrants are actually imagining Anglo-American writing as prescribed by TOEFL and IELTS. So they really determine they really determine the writing practices, and they have very, very clear molds and templates. So I think that's a very, very important part of that industrialization. In a way, it connects with the new liberal side that I highlighted at the beginning. So there are those were some of the dimensions of how the writing world actually oppresses minoritized populations and somehow really challenges the native writing practices. But within the same writing world, we also talked about writing communities and radical collaborations that people make, not only minoritized populations, but with educators who care about these people, and with writers who care about these people, and with publishers who care about these people. So I think one amazing kind of theme which came out of my research was how these writing communities and these intellectual circles function, and how these writers create different forms of resistance against the kind of not very helpful dynamics of the writing world. So I discuss these writing communities and intellectual circles as a kind of form of resistance, but at the same time I discuss these intellectual circles in the book as a very important form of pedagogy as well. So these are some of the major themes that I discuss in the book. I was wondering what kind of finale I can choose for this talk, and I thought I could talk a little bit with you about the next step of this project. So when I wrote the book, I had the privilege of teaching a lot of English teachers and writing teachers in different departments in North America. I taught at University of Dayton for a while, then I taught at University of Toronto, and now I'm at McGill. So I've been in conversation with a lot of educators who are going to our classes and to teach writing and English in general, or literacy. So as the next step of the project, what I did was I took the words of my participants to these classes, and I shared these with my students, these teacher candidates, and I asked them to read those and to see what resonates with them. I wanted to see if they see the political kind of dimensions and sociocultural dimensions and ideological dimensions that some of which I listed today. I wanted to see how much of that resonates with them, and I invited them to create found poems out of my participants' words. So without any explanation, I'm gonna finish this talk by just reading one of these poems and just bringing your attention to the fact that these teachers actually see the same sentiments in these words. Ideas like genre essentialism, the dominance of essayist literacy, which is really actually, I think, the dominance of report writing in our educational structures. I think Montaigne's, for instance, essayist tradition is not exactly what we are following in our educational structures. I think what we are doing is more of a report writing practice. So I think it was really amazing for me to see that they see the same themes, and I think they pay attention to those themes as well. And hopefully this practice is going to impact the future teaching. Communication was interesting. Out There is no poetry in everyday life. American competition is a fight. Complicated language exists to create freedom. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for attending this session. That means a lot to me, and it was really wonderful to have this opportunity to be in conversation with everyone.